Hello, and welcome to a new video. After my last video about trying to sneak into Blackthorn Pod's latest project, I've had a bunch of requests to do a video on floating health bars, like the ones that I made in that video. So here we are. So in this project, you're going to need the 2D sprite package, and I'm mentioning this because it's not always included in Unity. I think they stopped putting it in by default when you start a new project. So if you just go up to Windows, Package Manager, and down here in Unity Registry, you should see 2D Sprite, and just, if it's not already installed, just click install on that. You're going to need that. So about the scene I've got set up here, as usual, any assets that I've used I will link in the description below, and all I've got is a little astronaut in a deserty scene with some cacti. And if I press play, I've set up a little basic character controller just to make him run around, and if he hits a cactus, he gets damaged. Well, he doesn't get damaged because we haven't implemented any damage yet, but you get a damage animation, which is he just gets shot backwards a bit and flashes red. So that's what we're working with to start with. Obviously, we're just doing the health bars here, so you would have to adapt this to fit your own character controllers, but the beauty of the way we're going to do it is there's very minimal stuff that you will need to do to your own code. You basically just need to call the bar that we're going to create in this. So the first thing we're going to need is some images, and I have grabbed these two images from one of Kenny's assets pack. Again, links in the description. If you don't know who Kenny is, definitely check him out. The man is a saint. Creates free assets for game development and doesn't even ask for attribution if you don't want to, though I thoroughly recommend attributing whenever you use his assets, obviously. So if we go into our first one, we're going to pick the background one here and go up to texture type. We want to set it to 2D sprite and UI. We want to set the sprite mode to single. Doesn't matter pixels per unit for this one. But if you were doing like a pixel art style where you want the pixels to match, then you would want this would need to match all the artwork for the rest of the game. For this video, it doesn't really matter because we're not doing a pixel for pixel art style. And another thing we need to change is this here, mesh type, needs to be full rect, or you will get an error. So we'll just click apply for all of that. And now we should be able to drag this into the scene. I have to drag it up here because if I try and drag it here, it thinks I'm trying to drag it onto the tile map sprites. So now that that's down there, we can put it roughly above our player. So I believe I've got him in the center, so that should be fine. And we'll just put him at 0.75. No, 0.5. We'll just put them at 0.5. Now this is going to be the background of our health bar, so this is what you see behind the bar when it's empty or when it's depleting. If we stretch this out, you can see that we can make it the width that we want it, but you can also see that it looks terrible. Absolutely horrible. And the reason for that is because it's stretching the image, and we don't want it to stretch the image. We want it to, or we do want it to stretch the image, but we want it to stretch gracefully. So what we're going to do here is we're going to switch draw mode to sliced, which isn't going to do anything to start with, but if we go back to our square, click on sprite editor, we can create a border. So by dragging these in like this, that wants to be 4, and like this, what we're telling Unity is that it is okay to stretch these bits, these side bits, and these corner bits need to stay unstretched. So it will always keep the corner bits unstretched and as they are, and then these bits it will stretch out. And that allows it to stretch and contract gracefully. Obviously, where these go to will depend on your specific image that you're using. For me, it works out a border of about 4. Basically, you just need to drag it so that this bit is uniform all the way up. We need to click apply up here, close that. And now if we go back to our image in the actual game window, you can see it still looks like trash, but that's because we've stretched it. So if we bring it back to 1, and now we go down here to this value, underneath our draw mode, we've now got a size, a width and a height, and we can drag that in and out. And now you can see that our bar stretches, but now it stretches gracefully. I'm going to make that, let's make that 2.5. We'll go with 2.5. So I'm going to make it 2 wide and 0.25 high. Now, if we do the exact same thing for our other image, I'll just quickly do that now. And so this one, you can actually see the shape of the bar because this one isn't just a grey transparent border. The one thing that I will say is that this needs to have the same margins as the other one. Otherwise, it won't work properly. If you need it to match up like what I'm doing, it will need to have the same margins. Otherwise, it won't quite look right. So apply that. And another thing I'll say is you notice that I've got a white image instead of like for example, a green one or a red one for a health bar. That's an intentional choice. It's not a design choice. It is actually to do with what we're going to do later on in the video. So you want a neutral color to do what I'm going to do in this. So a light gray, white, something like that. Something that can be tinted because we're going to tint it. But if you have blue and you try and tint it red, you're going to end up with a purplish color. Whereas if you tint white blue, you get blue. So let's rename this bar container. and then I'm going to duplicate it, make this one bar, and we're going to put this one inside bar container, make sure it's locally placed 0, 0, 0, and we're going to drag in our second bar. And you can see it's automatically filled the other bar, and if we change the width, we can see it moves in and out inside the bar as we want it to, except for the fact that it's moving from the center. This is a really easy fix. If we go back to our sprite editor on the bar sprite, and we go down to where it says pivot, and we change pivot to custom, and we just want to set X to 0. So now the pivot point is here. So when we say put this item at 0, 0, this point is the point that will be put at 0, 0. So if we apply that, close this, you can see it's moved the bar off to the side, because now the position of 0, 0 is putting the bar in the middle. So that easy fix for that is to just move it back. So this position, -1, is half of width. Our width is 2, so we need to move it 1 back. The other thing we need to look at is we need to make sure that our bars are going to be ahead of everything. So right now our sorting order is 0 for the bar container. I'm going to set that to 10. That just makes it sure it's in front of everything here. And then the actual bar will set to 11. And now if we change the width of the bar, you can see it's moving from the right side. So we've got the foundation of our bar working, but we need to actually make it work as a script in a game. Let's go into our scripts folder, and we're going to create a new script, and it's going to be called bar controller. And we're going to drag bar controller onto the bar container, not the bar itself, but the bar container. So one reference that we definitely need is our sprite renderer. Then I'm going to put a couple of temporary values in here that we can use to modify. I'm just making these public because we don't need to, we're not keeping them basically. As something I've been bad about in past videos is that you should use private values wherever possible, unless they absolutely need to be public. You should always use private values, and I'm going to try and be better about that in the future. But these values are going to be public just because it's quicker to type it, and we're not keeping them. And for this one, we're also going to give it a range so we can mess with the value in the inspector. Then we're going to need a private vector2 that's going to be called start size. So let's get a start function going, and all that's going to be in the start function is start size equals bar renderer.size, and that is setting this vector2 here, start size, to this vector2 here, width and height. And while we're here, we may as well drag this in here. So we're dragging the bar sprite into the bar renderer sprite, not the bar container. And then in our update, first off, we're going to get the current width of the bar, and that's going to be float bar size equals, and then we want to start size.x divided by, and we need to recast these as a float because they're currently ints. And the reason they're ints is because when you're dealing with health, you're not going to be dealing with floats normally. The bar needs to be a float because it's a gradual movement between, in this case, 2 and 1, or 2 and 0, or -1 and 1 even. But the health value that you have is just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Like there's no point in working with floats when you're doing a health bar. So we recast that as a float just for the purpose of calculating this. And then we want to so we're dividing the start size, so that's where the bar, how big the bar is to start with, by the maximum value, and then we're multiplying it by the current value. That's essentially working out a percentage where it's a percentage of the width of the bar. And then we can just say bar renderer.size equals new vector2 bar size, and then we just want to keep our start size.y. And the reason we're doing that is because if we set the bar size to a different, if we make it a thicker bar, for example, we don't have to change any code. The code automatically sorts itself out. If we go back into our inspector and we give our max value something, needs to have a value there, and let's just set this to 100, press play. You see we have a bar, and if we move the bar in and out, there we are. So now we can modify this value from inside our code and make the health bar do what we want it to do. Let's start making this a bit more appropriate for game use. So we don't need to do this every frame. We're going to create a function for this that we can call when we want to actually update the bar. So public void UpdateBar, and it's going to take in an int current value and an int max value. So anytime we call this function, we need to give it the current and max value. And the beauty of this is it means that this bar is not tied to anything. We can drop this bar onto a player character for its health. We can drop it onto a damage meter, a mana meter. Every time we use it, we're just going to give it the current value and the max value. And then that way it will always work regardless of the use case that you want to put it in. So the first thing we're going to do in here is just clamp current value. And the reason we're clamping current value is because if the value somehow is less than 0 or greater than max value, it's going to cause our bar to go flying off outside of its bounds, and we don't want that. So this ensures that the bar, regardless of what the values are, the bar will always stay within its container. I'm just going to clamp it between 0 and max value. I need to point out, this is only for the bar, this validation. You can still, depending on what you're doing in your player character controller, if it's health, for example, you can still make your player character controller's health shoot off above its max health or go below 0 if you don't have validation there. This is just to ensure that the health bar, or the bar, depending on what you're using it for, does what it's supposed to do. And then we're just going to copy this and slap that there. And now, because we're getting our current value and max value here, we don't need to store it anymore, and we can delete those public variables. So again, to make things work, we're just going to create a little temporary code here. We're going to store a current health value and a max health value. And then we're just going to say if input.getKeyDown keycode.q current health minus equals 10. Else if keycode.e this time. Keys are completely irrelevant, by the way. This is just for testing. And we're going to add 10. So basically I've just added 2 keys. One of them takes 10 health away. One of them adds 10 health. And then we're just going to update bar current health max health. Now we no longer have our slidey bar in here. Just minimize that so everything's a bit less cluttered. But if we press play, we can make the bar move in code. So now I'm pressing the buttons that we just assigned in the update. And you can see you can't tell because obviously you can't see what I'm pressing, but if I go past the maximum, the bar stays where it is. Now here's where you need to have validation in your player code, because if I press the maximum and keep pressing it, it carries on incrementing the value. So even though the bar's locked to the right position, the actual value is still going up. So when I start pressing back down, it takes a moment for the value to get back down to where it will affect the bar, if that makes sense. You think about it, if the health is 150 and I've set it to 200, the bar's still going to be here all the way between 200 and 150, and then it will start going down again. And the same if you get to 0. So you do need to have validation in your player script, which I will sort of touch on very slightly when we get to adding it into my player script. So I mentioned the choice of white sprite was for a reason. By choosing a neutral sprite, we can change the color of the sprite renderer to our desired color at runtime, which means that we can basically change this color to suit our needs. And again, this means we can drop this bar wherever we want. So to do this, all we're going to do is have a second value in our inspector, serialize field, private color, and we're just going to call it bar color. And then when we initialize in start, we'll just say bar renderer dot color equals bar color. Now, if we go back to our game now and press play, you'll see the health bar actually disappears. And that's because by default, if you go into color, by default, when you set a color in the inspector, it's got 0 transparency or full transparency, 0 opacity. So we need to set that to maximum and then we can pick a color. So I'm going to go with like a faded green color. There we go. And now we have a green health bar, and you can set that to whatever you want. It could be blue, it could be red, whatever color you want. And that's why we pick a neutral colored sprite. In my case, white. It could be gray if you wanted a darker one. But if you pick a color and then you tint it, you're going to get a mismatch of those colors, which, like I said before, if you had a red bar and then you tried to tint it blue, you'd end up with a purple bar. So this way, at least it looks like the color that you want. So that's essentially the health bar part of it done, but I do want to make a few little changes to the script before we implement it into our character controller. So firstly, we can get rid of the temporary code for removing the bar, which is basically the entire update function. We don't need that. And then secondly, I want to swap the start code for an initialization function. And that's as simple as just renaming the start function. And we'll make this public. And then what this does is it means that we can initialize it from within the thing that is using the bar. The reason we might want to do that is so we can set the bar up depending on how we need it. So we've got the bar color and we've got the size. Well, maybe we want the bar size to be different. And if that's the case, we can pass in a different bar size or a different color or whatever else we might want to change. Maybe you want to put text on the bar and then you would put in what the text will say in the initialization function. So I'm going to overload this because I want to have the option of not passing in any values. So this one's going to take in a vector2 start size and a color bar color. And then we're just going to cut this out of here and we'll replace these with start size and bar color. And then in our basic initialization function, rather than setting it in here, what we're going to do is we're going to call this function. And the reason we're going to do that is because that means if we want to make any changes to our initialization setup, we only need to do it in this one function. We don't need to do it in both. So in here, all this one's going to do is say init, and then we're going to pass in the bar color, the default bar color and the default size. So in this case, it's going to be bar renderer dot size and bar color. So if we don't want to mess with the size and give it a specific color, we can just stick with the default, which is what this will do. So that's essentially the fully working script for a bar, like a progress bar, health bar, mana bar, whatever kind of bar you want. But obviously we need to implement this in our game. So let's go back into Unity, get a prefabs folder, and I'm just going to drag this in here. And now we have a prefab for our bar container, for our bar, sorry. And we'll call this, just call it progress bar, I guess. And then the one that we've got in the scene, I'm just going to drag into our astronaut. So now he is childed to the astronaut, and whenever we move around, he's going to go with him. So now we need to actually put this in our player code. So to do that, I'm going to go into my player script. I've collapsed most of the stuff in here because it's not relevant to this video. I've already got some health code implemented. So right now I'm storing the max health, the current health, and then when the player takes damage, I've just got this take damage function here. It decrements the current health amount by the amount passed into the function. And then if it gets below 0, it just debug log says the player has died. Obviously you would have proper death code in a proper game. This is just placeholder code. So the one thing we need to add to this is a serialized field, private bar controller, and we're just going to call it health bar or health bear, as the case may be. And I'll drag that in now before I forget, because I will forget. Okay. And then to actually implement this code, we need in our start function, healthbar.init. And again, if you wanted to give it a specific size and color, you could pass that in there as well. You could say something like new vector2 30.5 color.red. You could do something like that, and then you could do something like that, and then it would give you a wider, thicker bar, and it would be red. But I'm just going to stick with the default, which is the one that we've been looking at. And then finally, in our take damage function, and by the way, when you do implement health, I don't know if this is something that any of you needed to hear, but when you do implement things like taking damage, always have like a single function that deals with it. Make your health private so that nothing can edit it from outside of the player controller script, and then have everything that changes the health go through this function. And if you've got like a gain health function as well to add health, always have them go through those functions, and then that way you can always control what goes on. Nothing weird's going to happen like your player taking damage and you don't know where it's coming from, because it will all be going through the same script. And it also means you can validate it. So if I wanted to, I could clamp the value between 0 and max health, which I should be doing as well. But again, this is not what this isn't what this video is about. So healthbar.UpdateBar, and we're just going to pass in current health, max health. We'll go back to Unity. And now we should find that if we walk into a cacti or a cactus, we take damage. There we go. And that's that. So, I mean, that is essentially the full script. But there is another thing that we want to look at. So right now, this is a 2D script, which is fine if it's a 2D game. But what if you want to use this health bar in a 3D game? So if I go up to our camera and I make it not orthographic, turn it to perspective, and I mess with the orientation of the camera, you can see the health bar is flat, which, I mean, at the minute, it doesn't look that weird because the player is flat. The world is flat. Everything is flat. But if this was a 3D character, the health bar would still be similarly distorted, is the word I guess I'm looking for. And we don't want that. So we're going to fix this with a simple script, which we're going to call face camera. So in here, we're going to have a private camera, a private transform, camera transform. And then in our start function, we're just going to get the values for those. And we'll get camera by saying camera equals camera.main. And then camera transform, we can just get from the camera that we've just grabbed. Camera transform equals camera.transform. And then in late update, private void late update. First off, we're going to say if camera.orthographic return. And the reason for this is because if the camera is set to orthographic, it means that we're in sort of 2D mode and the camera is never going to rotate. So we don't need to worry about rotating this to face the camera because the camera is never going to rotate. So we just need to make sure when you set your game up that the health bar is facing the way you want it to face. And then the actual code, a little bit more complicated because so you can just do transform.look at camera transform. But if you do this, it doesn't quite work right. And I'll show you how it works. So if we just go to our bar container and drag face camera onto here, so you can see it does kind of face it, but you see how it's flopping around as the player moves. We don't want it to do that. We want it to stay flat. So to make that work, what we actually want to do is say transform.position plus camera transform.transform.rotation times vector3.forward. And then it's camera transform dot rotation times vector3 dot up. But I've got an extra transform that I don't need there. Now if we go back in, you can see the health bar is always facing the camera and it's the right way up. And if we rotate the camera or anything like that, it always stays facing upwards relative to the camera. And the good thing about this script is you can drop it on anything. Like it's not specific to the health bar. It just makes something face the camera. So for example, if I drop it on the player, then the player will also be upright relative to the camera. And then you could also drop it on game elements. Like we've got these cacti here. Kind of get that don't starve effect going, although you'd have to use proper sprites. These sprites aren't cut out, they have big blocks of plain colour behind them, but you get what I mean. So the last thing I'd like to look at is to give the health bar a smooth transition, because right now when you bump into let's just maximize this so we can get a proper look at it. Right now when we bump into a cactus, our health bar just moves down. It doesn't slide down, it just goes from what it is to the next value. So let's fix that and go back to our bar controller script. And one of the first things I do, it's not really essential, but I just think it looks a bit neater, is I want to have a private float function for doing this part rather than have it in that script, because then if you ever need to do it anywhere else, you can. As it turns out, we don't need to in this, but still, I think it's good practice. So int current value, int max value. And obviously we need to give it a name, so it's going to be called get bar size. And then we can just grab this line as it is, and all we're going to do is return that. And we can replace this with get bar size, and we just pass in current value and max value. So that won't change anything about the way it works, but it just means that this get bar width can be gotten easily from anywhere. And the next thing is we're going to need a speed value for our bar. This is like how fast the bar will slide down. So serialize field, private float, bar speed. And let's just go set a bar speed, because if it's 0, obviously it won't work. So by default, we'll have the bar speed be 0.9. I believe that was a value that I liked when I was testing. And we're also going to need a private float target width. So we know what the current width is, because that's the width of the bar. We can get that from barRenderer.size.x, but we have a target width. So we're going to modify the current width frame to frame, and then when we get to the target width, we're done, we can stop. So we need to set that. So in here, we're going to say target width equals start size.x. And we need to make sure that we do this after we've already set start size. So then in our update bar, we can get rid of all of this, and we're just going to have target width equals get bar size, and we're going to call the current value max value. And then we're going to need an update function, bring back the update function. And the first thing we're going to do is check. So we'll say if barRenderer.size.x does not equal target width. So we're only doing this if the current bar renderer does not equal the width that we want it to be. The current bar renderer width isn't the width we want it to be. That way this update function isn't doing anything unless the bar needs to move. We're going to need a float variable here, which we're just going to call current width. And it's going to equal mathf.moveTowards. We're moving from barRenderer.size.x to target width at a speed of time.delta_time times bar speed. And then we can just set that value by saying barRenderer.size equals new vector2 current width start size.y. Sorry, no underscore on that one. And then if we go back to Unity, we should see that our bar has smooth movement. And that is it. That is the floating health bar script. So hope this was useful for you all. And as always, I'd like to thank my amazing Patreons and Twitch subscribers and Discord Nitro boosters and basically anyone who is supporting. You're all amazing. Big thanks to everyone who supports, whether it is financially or just liking and sharing is a big help. But of course, the super special thanks go to the Sugar Daddy/Mama tier supporters, who are Dave Maldine, Reg Reed, Gabriel White, Aaron Clark, Mr. Drunken Dragon, and Tim Arie. And just a quick mention for anyone who didn't know, Beaks Jam 2023 coming up of January. All the details I will drop in the description for this as well. Would love to see as many of you there as possible. Thank you for joining, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.